Hi, in this lecture, we're going to work on Chapter 12 and talk about the spinal cord. Now remember, in the CNS, you have the brain and you have the spinal cord, and we've already covered all the material on the brain. So we're going to focus on the cord here, and the cord has two main functions. Number one, it conducts information to and from the brain. So it's going to conduct sensory information up and motor information down. And the second main function is it's the processing center for reflexes. Now, if you look at the gross anatomy of the cord, it's about 18 inches long, and you probably know it's enclosed with vertebra. Remember, the vertebra surround and protect it, as well as the cerebral spinal fluid in the meninge. The actual cord, however, ends right around L1, L2 at a structure called the conus medullaris. So that's kind of like the end of the actual thick cord. And then protruding or growing inferior to the cord are all these nerves and these nerve roots. So it's a thick cord-like structure, about 18 inches long, down to about L1, L2, which is right around your belly button. And then as it continues to grow, as you grow, it actually forms these nerve roots. So you might be wondering, what am I talking about? Well, basically, the spinal cord only grows until you're about 4 years old. So think about your size when you were 4, and if your cord was about this big. Well, as you get bigger, right, your cord goes with you, but as it grows with your spine and your body, you need these extensions of the cord to come down for your lower extremities. So the conus medullaris is the end of the cone part, the cord, and then you have these nerves coming down, and that's what forms the cauda equina, which literally means horse's tail. So this is one of our models in lab that you can see the spinal cord on, and actually what you can see, there's an upper area here and the lower area here. So number 3 is trying to point right around the conus medullaris, and then 4 is on that cauda equina. You'll see all these nerves coming down. Now number 2 over here on this side, and number 4 over on this side, that's the dura mater. Remember, the meninges also surround the spinal cord. And so number 5 on this is going to be the arachnoid. Now, number 3 here, number 1 are some nerves coming off the cord. And we're going to be talking about this thing here. Number 1 is actually your dorsal median sulcus. We see some dorsal horns here for number 2, and that'll make more sense in just a minute, I hope. When we look at the cord, we know it's broken down into different regions. You already learned the bones. We have a cervical area, we have thoracic, lumbar, and sacral, and there's coccyx down here. And each area of the spinal cord is going to have nerves that come off of it. So we'll have cervical nerves and sacral nerves and lumbar nerves, etc. But if you look at the cord here, you'll notice that it's these are the regions of the cord, and that they're not the same size. So what we know is that we have actually a lot more, this inside stuff is called gray matter that kind of looks like the letter H here. We have a lot more of that in our lumbar area and cervical because of all the muscles that it has to control. So just know that it has the 5 segments and that the segments are not identical, and they vary because if there's more muscles to control, you're going to have more of this internal stuff called gray matter. And these lumbar and sacral and coccygeal, those are the roots that come down after the conus medullaris. And so we call, these things the whole cord, and we have these spinal nerves. You already learned the cranial nerves. So spinal nerves come off the spinal cord. There's 31 segments or 31 spinal nerves, and they are right and left. And remember, when they come off of the cord, they have to leave through the bone, so they go through those holes. Those intervertebral foramen is how they exit. Now, how do we name them? Well, we name them according to the area. So just like we did vertebra, right? We did the letter and the number. So we use a similar naming system, but they're a little bit different. So all the thoracic spinal nerves are named for the vertebra that's above, and all the cervical cranial nerves are named for the vertebra that's below. And so you probably remember, if we just do vertebra, if I was going to draw my cervical, how many cervical vertebrae are there? Well, let's see, we should have had 7, I hope you said. 5, 6, 7. So this represents my cervical vertebra, and then right here would be T1, and then I'll draw a little T2 and make that So let's look at the bones. We have 7 cervical vertebrae, and then I just drew it down to the thoracic. So all thoracic nerves, spinal nerves, are named for the vertebra above. So the nerve coming off here would be spinal nerve T1, right? Because it's from below vertebra T1. And then this one over here would be spinal nerve T2. If we look at the cervical nerves, they're named for the vertebra below. So if I'm looking at, let me try to get this together here, C1, that's here. Because remember, up here are going to be my occipital condyles. And then, so that would be C1, C2. And so if I look at my nerve, something interesting happens. Notice that now I have this little area between C7 and T1 bones. So even though there are 7 cervical vertebrae, there are 8 cervical nerves. And I just fixed that typo. So cervical nerves. So there's an extra cervical nerve because of how they're labeled and how they're numbered. Now, if we look at the spinal cord, so we're going to take a peek at it, we do see that these nerves are out here. Okay. And if you look at a nerve is coming in and then it splits into 2. So nerves are going to split into something called a root. And there's going to be a ventral root as well as a dorsal root. Now you can call the ventral root the anterior root, or you can call it ventral. Traditionally it's called ventral, but if you call it anterior, that's okay. So that's the one that's anterior. And then the dorsal root, or you could call it posterior root, is the one that's posterior. So let's go over the cord. The first thing you would notice if you look at a cord is that it has these grooves. And one of them is a sulcus and one is a fissure. So you probably remember that a fissure is a little wider and deeper. So the anterior median fissure is on the anterior or ventral side of the cord, where the posterior median sulcus is on the posterior side. And that's how you can tell if you're looking at anterior or posterior on any spinal cord that you look at. You look for that fissure, and when you find that, you know that's the ventral side or the anterior side of the cord. Now, the other thing we know about the cord is that the white matter is superficial and the gray matter is deep. You might remember in the brain, it was opposite. The gray matter was superficial and the white matter was deep. So it's just flipped here. So the gray matter is described as kind of looking like a butterfly or the letter H. And so we're going to be naming the pieces of the gray matter. Now remember, gray matter means cell bodies, right, of neurons or unmyelinated axons, where white matter is going to be all the myelinated axons. And that white matter will have a lot of tracts. And you might remember that a tract is a bundle of axons in the CNS. So let's look at the gray matter first. You can see it here. Kind of go with the H example. There's something that connects the 2 sides of the gray matter, and that's called the gray commissure. So that's the piece right in the middle. You might remember the corpus callosum was a commissure that helped communicate between the 2 cerebral hemispheres. Now, right in the middle of that is a little hole. And the little hole is called the central canal. And the central canal contains cerebrospinal fluid. And you might remember that it flows inside the spinal cord in the central canal. Remember, it's inside the brain in the ventricles. And it also is going to circulate around both the brain and the spinal cord in that subarachnoid space. So let's identify the gray matter now. And so if we look at it, we're going to have horns. Kind of think of it like a letter H. So there's dorsal horns and there's ventral horns. Now the dorsal horns are going to be posterior. So if I'm looking at this, I see my posterior median sulcus on the back, and I see my anterior median fissure. That's anterior. I see it's a little wider. And so the horns that are back here are going to be called the dorsal horns. Now again, you can call them posterior horns if you want to. But these contain interneurons, and they have sensory nuclei, and that's a fancy way of saying they have a lot of cell bodies in there. Remember, nuclei are when you have cell bodies and neurons with similar functions. Now, the ventral horns, on the other hand, are going to be on the anterior side, so they're here. And the ventral horns have cell bodies, again, that would be what a nuclei is, of somatic motor neurons. Now you might remember that somatic motor neurons or somatomotor nuclei are the cell bodies of somatic motor neurons. And so if the cell bodies are here, then remember the part of the neuron that carries the information away is the axon. So you'll actually see that these roots that we just talked about are all those axons. And the other thing you should notice so far is that we have some sensory information posterior, and then we have motor anterior. And our spinal cord is pretty organized where all sensory comes in the back and all motor goes out the front. Now, in certain areas of the cord, we're going to have things called lateral horns. So there are these bulges here on the sides. And the lateral horns are going to have the cell bodies, nuclei, remember the same thing, cell bodies of autonomic motor neurons. So anything going out to your autonomic nervous system, remember that's efferent, is going to be here. Now understand that these lateral horns are only found in thoracic and lumbar areas only. Those are the only areas of the spinal cord that have those. But those axons need to leave as well, and guess what? They go out that ventral root too. So we also have something called a dorsal root ganglion, and you might remember that the ganglion is a cluster of cell bodies in the PNS. And so if we look, we're going to see these little like bulging areas. And these are what are called the DRG, or dorsal root ganglion. So that's going to have the cell bodies of all sensory neurons. And so when the sensory is coming in, it's going to synapse. And remember that sensory neurons are usually unipolar. So you'll see it come in like this. If we're looking at motor, what we just showed for somatic motor, remember that somatic motor cell bodies are in the ventral horn and they go out the anterior portion. So when we look at our roots are either sensory or motor. Notice that the ventral root or anterior root is always going to be motor. It's always carrying information away from the spinal cord, whereas our dorsal root is always sensory. It's always carrying information in. So if we look in this view, we can see again, if you look at our roots, we have our spinal nerve, and then the nerve splits into the roots. And so the roots are always separated, and the roots are either motor, right? They're carrying information away, or sensory. Whereas the spinal nerve has both. So they fuse together to form the nerve. So the spinal nerves are mixed because they have both types of information. Now, the white matter all around the H is going to form what's called a column, or we can just call it a funiculus. And I'm totally fine with columns. So you just have to separate it into an anterior. Both sides have an anterior. They both have a lateral, and they both have a posterior. And remember that these columns are going to be tracks. And these tracks are either going to run up, in which case they're carrying sensory information up to the brain. So we say they're ascending tracks, or they're coming down from your cerebral cortex to go out to muscles. So remember, when you have somatic, right, if we go back up here for a minute, in the ventral horns, somatic means it's going to skeletal muscle. But when we talk about the lateral horn, and in the lateral horn we say autonomic, that is going to your cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, right? Things that are not voluntarily controlled. And so our motor tracks can carry information down to skeletal muscle or your autonomic structure. So we're going to be looking at these models in lab. I threw two in the PowerPoint so you can kind of sync it up. But just to give you an overview, you can see the DRG, right? This little bulging thing here. You can easily see the white matter. This little space here is the anterior median fissure. This is your spinal nerve. Basically, you're going to see it's called a ventral ramus. We'll get there soon. You can see the posterior horns. You can see the lateral horn, right, on the side. So the gray matter is called horns, and then you can see the anterior horns here as well. So it'd be good, you'll be looking at that, and this is another model that we have as well. And so if we're going to try to identify some of these pieces, numbers 1, 2, and 3, that's your white matter. So those are your columns, your posterior, your lateral, and your anterior. You can see this number 5 is showing the anterior median fissure, and you can see your layers of meninges here. So 19 is dura mater, 18 is arachnoid, and 17 is the pia mater. You can see your horns, right? 7 is the posterior horn, 8 is lateral, and 9 is anterior. 10, that's your dorsal root. 16, this is your ventral root. Here's your dorsal root ganglia. And 4 is your posterior median sulcus. Now, we haven't talked about these out here too much yet. We'll be getting to that in a later lecture. So the white matter, remember, is organized in columns. Basically, just know where it is. Posterior's in the back, anterior's in the front, and laterals are on the side. And they're going to contain the tracts that will carry information up if it's sensory and down if it's motor. And we're going to talk more about those in our upcoming lectures.